Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today for this evolving this meetup group on the natures of love and value, sometimes described in terms of the cybernetics of love or the active inference of love, depending on or the category theory of love, or the experience and the practice of it. The idea is living into this question and trying to answer it in all the ways we can while also keeping our uncertainty and the multiplicity alive. What is love? What is value? And with that intention, this is our third meeting. The first one was just us all gathering and just starting to address this question with kind of like a Quaker ceremony. And in the last session, we had wonderful meditations being led by Andrew Holecek, and Amelia shared her experiences with helping to guide people through practices of mindful self-compassion as she learned from Kirsten Neff and as she's tried to apply in the context of caretaking and dementia and in her own life. And it's really grateful for everyone to be with us. And today we'll be continuing with a session where Andrew will once again guide us through an experiential practice, a meditation, building upon what came before. And then Shinzen will share with us some of how he approaches the world through category theory. And I'll be jamming with him, and others are welcome to come in as inspired. Initially, we were thinking of having this be a conversation with additional category theorists and shamans, Shanna Dobson and Dalton last time, and Chris Fields. But that's going to have to wait for another session. So right now, it'll be more Shinzen guiding us and us all joining in a discussion. Andrew will, but mostly focus on Shinzen leading us. Andrew will then come back and bring us back into our experience, fly off in all these directions conceptually, getting us in touch with our source and what that might mean. Then we'll have breakout rooms where people can all discuss how things land and make sure that everyone is getting to participate and feel things in different ways. And then we're going to come back together for another discussion and then close out. So that's the rough shape of things. And with that being said, Andrew, I'd be very grateful if you would lead us.
Thank you, Adam. Nice to see everybody. I trust you can hear me. Yeah, I think it's fantastic that we can start with some connectivity and some presence. And so this practice that I introduced last session that I find extraordinarily profound, subtle, nuanced, is a form of metta, which is indeed a type of loving kindness towards oneself. We express towards others what we express towards ourselves. And so a greater sense of appreciation for this practice, I think, may be in order. So a few just simple comments to strengthen the view behind this practice, to understand, appreciate the depth, and like, why am I doing this? What is a fruitional aspect of this practice? And so I thought I'd say just a few things to strengthen this view in relation to my understanding of the developing vision of this group as Adam articulates it. And one is this issue of the alignment problem, which I would argue starts right here with a practice like this. And some of you may know that in Sanskrit, the word for suffering is dukkha, which is often represented as a wheel with the axle with a hole off center, which leads to a highly misaligned, very bumpy ride through life. And so those of you who do any form of inner work meditation probably understand that these practices are largely about, it can be seen as getting back into alignment with the present moment through practices like mindfulness, through alignment with yourself through practices like we're going to be doing today, to find our center, to return to source. And so this practice is largely about aligning with who we are, with our humanity, and maybe discovering for ourselves that being out of alignment is in fact being out of touch with ourselves, first of all, out of touch with others, out of touch with nature, with reality altogether. And so it may seem a very simple practice, but don't let the simplicity belie the profundity. It can be viewed absolutely as a form of dzogchen, which is arguably in the Tibetan schema, the highest tradition, where that term is defined as great perfection, great completion. I also like to feel it as great alignment to whatever I may be feeling in this present moment, which we'll see in just a second when we do it. The other thing that connects to what Adam's talking about that I think is worth mentioning is how this practice works with a narrative of connecting reconnecting to source. My experience in doing this for decades is this very simple practice will eventually show you that you're always already connected. The issue is not so much how to connect as one of cessation. In other words, how to stop disconnecting, stop outsourcing, stop distracting. Etymologically, the word means literally to pull apart from the present moment, from who we are. And in particular with this practice, from challenging feelings. I find this simple hand over heart meditation extremely applicable in this age of distress, duress, divisiveness, political upheaval, and the like. It's a way, as Trungpa Rinpoche, the radical iconoclastic Tibetan master once said, there is no way out. The magic is to discover that there is a way in. And so this practice, in fact, shows you the way in, shows you how to stop outsourcing. And so therefore, as you'll discover if you hang with it, the genius of this very simple meditation is it's simultaneously diagnostic and prescriptive. It will diagnose fundamentally what I believe is the essence of the meta crisis, which is dismemberment upon dismemberment, alignment or misalignment upon misalignment that leads to this colossal misalignment that we're seeing in the meta crisis. And eventually we'll show you, and then we'll do it. Where is this source? According to the non-dual traditions, we can see this for ourselves. The source is the center of our centerless self. And this practice invites us into alignment with this centerless center. So with that said, let's go ahead and engage it. If it speaks to you, go ahead. The invitation is to close your eyes. This practice invites a heightened quality of interoception in the affective definition of that word. And here we're working with it, of course, in a somewhat contrived artificial incubator fashion, but this practice really develops industrial strength when you're in a heap of hurt. So the invitation is to turn into yourself, to get into a kind of fearless alignment with, and here's the kicker, whatever you're feeling right now. Don't try to change anything. Don't try to be spiritual. Be perfectly human with all your imperfections. Practice is to open to and radically, unconditionally accept whatever state of being you're in right now. Wake down into the wisdom of your body. Feel fully, that's the great perfection, great completion feeling. Feel whatever you're feeling, but don't feed it. And we know we're feeding it when we leave our sensate, sensual bodies and run into conceptual commentary. We start thinking about it. We notice that, catch, release. And gently return to whatever we're feeling. Holding it, as it's sometimes said, in the cradle of loving kindness, which means holding yourself, which is what the hand over heart represents, holding yourself in this embrace of radical acceptance. I start every day with this practice, developing a good habit. Dare we say good karma, and it comes into play when I get the news that someone has died. I get a challenging diagnosis from my doctor. When something really becomes challenging, my hand automatically comes to my heart and I say yes to whatever I'm feeling, no matter how difficult. I align myself to whatever I'm feeling, and here I mend the great misalignment problem, starting with myself. I watch the news, I hear some very unpleasant political news or tragedy. I feel a contraction, I feel some pain. My hand comes up to my heart and I embrace that feeling. Characteristic of the Dzogchen tradition, which this practice is a part, short sessions repeated often. You don't have to have a long meditation session to connect. You can connect on the spot. And this practice is an invitation to do just that. Okay, hands down on thighs. Perhaps notice this very brief moment of alignment and connection can perfume your mind, your experience, and create a wonderful atmosphere for our engagement this morning. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Andrew. Alignment begins with us. How can that be possible if you can't face your own experience? It's the fundamental principles of cybernetics. You need the information. Wade shared on this website with me, Principia Cyberneticus. I put it in the chat and I'll put it in the notes. We're trying to understand abstractly what is love, what is value. But if it's lost experientially, it doesn't seem like we can go far. But in terms of bringing both things to bear, Shinzen, I was wondering if you'd be willing to share with us. And earlier, I was envisioning, and later, other people with a background in category theory and a conversation with you. But right now, I'm hoping, will you be willing to guide us?
I think it would be a great idea if I factored myself through your lens, because I'm pretty flexible and you have the vision, Adam. You've we've been called to this hub. So you can draw out of me what you think you and the group would most flourish with. And then maybe I'll force you to factor through me every now and again. Is that an okay protocol?
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you.
We're
So,
already doing functorial spirituality, or at least functorial discourse.
so can you say more about functorial discourse in terms of so within category theory, so a functor, how might you describe this to people? In terms of, it would be like a relation of relations, a way of set it.
That's probably the best way in general. If you had to try to use colloquial language, you could also talk about it being a generalization of a function as you upgrade from one level of math that has been standard for a long time, to a new level of math, genuine next level shit that is absolutely established science because it's established theorems of mathematics. But people are going to lose you pretty quickly. I hope people were at least following what I was saying. That's another way you can approach it that might be a deeper way to talk about it. The reason I introduced functor was so that I could have an adjective, functorial discussion or functorial discourse, where, in fact, if we took the time to carefully describe and define what we mean by a functor intrinsic to math and extrinsic to life, if we took the time to do that, then we would have a very convenient adjective. It would be, okay, this is what X looks like viewed from the point of view of what science looks like if science internally upgrades from set theoretic foundations to category theoretic foundations.
So
That's something that the scientists of the world need to know about. The new sheriff in town, maybe. Really, literally. So now I'm getting poetic and whatever, but is that enough of an answer?
it is. And so please correct me if I misspeak. So in terms of ways of knowing and sense making, category theory is a powerful tool in terms of it's a way of, I guess you could, I don't know if you would call it an ontology, but it's like a way of,
It's, can I interrupt? An ontology on steroids, speed, and LSD?
good God. So that's the,
Take that.
I'm going to take it.
It was quite a party.
It's quite a party. So
Quite a party. He did it. He returned the ball. Oh, dude.
so
Good
yes.
move. Good move.
So,
You
so
returned it perfectly.
the
Good party. This is a good party. Yeah.
basically
You want to be invited to this fucking party, man.
having the tools we would need to handle a question as whether you say it's complicated or simple as what is love, what is value, but the deep questions, the big questions, and specifically these questions as I've been pursuing them, we're all pursuing them because we're all humans and we're all facing alignment problems in terms of just trying to be human because we are cybernetic systems, goal-seeking systems, valuing systems. But I've been specifically also a variety of ways. More recently pursuing this question in the context of AI, it's long-standing interest. But if people are talking about this alignment problem with respect to AI, and so some way of speaking, and when you hear different people talk about what's being aligned, people will move between places where from the mystical to the nihilistic. So people will say we must. So I'm more of a camp saying we want to align AI to something like love, something like humanity, humaneness, care. Others would say that's just a naivete. What is love even? Does it even matter? And I think it does. I think it might be, it's the only thing that matters in a very deep way. There's a way in which like it might be the most fundamental truth about the world across scales, like things resonating themselves into being. But there's an ongoing conversation right now of the nature of value. Is anything even of value? Like in this world where people are like of political upheaval and is the singularity near? I don't personally think so. But in asking this question, people are asking questions of fundamental philosophy. And so we're bringing in the big guns, including one the big gun of having the courage to actually do phenomenology and face our experiences and be human. Oh God, thank you, Andrew. That's a big gun. And then another big gun conceptually is things like applied category theory. And that's a big gun. And I personally have like more than a little math phobia. So there's like an element of my mind which like starts to explode when I think about it. I know it's good. I know it's beautiful. It's powerful. And I'm like intimidated by it. I'm putting category theory on this pedestal. And it's like, and so like my own experience of love, I'm like, oh no, this is too much. This is a realm beyond me. But at the same time, to move into this territory of basically trying to figure out what is love, what is a value, and trying to advocate for it in a way as something that is worthy of serious consideration. To be precise on it, we need things like potentially applied category theory. It's a way of being precise. So it's like we want to be true and grounded. And so we're having these experiential practices and not like losing the foundation, the true, the actual experience of value and discussing it, but at the same time, wanting to be able to also address it in a conceptual way. Can both things happen? I think they can. So that's part of what I'm hoping for in this discussion series and meetup. So,
Adam,
yes.
would it be okay if I tried to frame and condense what you were saying in a way that I think can connect things?
Not just okay, please do.
Okay, so one thing that I think comes up for me and many people is when you mention category theory, there's many things that we can take a framework to be. So I was reading a really wonderful paper this morning on the proper treatment of dynamical systems in cognitive science, and I like the breakdown that he poses.
Whose paper?
Randall Beer. And anyways, the ways that he delineates the role of mathematical formalism in minds is that you can understand it as a mathematical formalism, as a way of manipulating symbols, as a conceptual framework for our experience, and then also as a literal theory of cognition or reality. So maybe the question that I hear Adam asking, the question that I have is, what is the role of math here? Is it a tool for thinking clearer? Is it what reality is? Is it something in between?
Wow. That's a very interesting way to ask the question. Adam, what do you think of Max's direction and condensation?
I think it's elegant and beautiful, and it hits the mark. The core chords that need to resonate to bring things into coherence, I think. I feel.
Can you
And so I
summarize
might
it for
say,
me again?
so
I'd like to hear it again,
with respect to
how
something,
he said it.
with respect to something like category theory, like what is its role? And there's a sense where and this also comes up with respect to things like other like grand unified theories, like active inference is another way of thinking of these things. Like there's a lot of different like grand unified theories, like perspectives of the world is like the world as a kind of neural network. There's all sorts of grand ambitious theories. And what do they do for you? What are they like these? And the one thing is as a tool, definitely as a way of modeling, as a way of sense making, and not necessarily making like statements about the universe as it is in itself, to the extent we can ever say something about the universe as it is in itself. The noumenal world, as Kant might put it, which as Wittgenstein might have said, can we even speak of it? We always only have this phenomenal axis point of the world, which is bigger than any of our understandings. And then we come up with these tools to try to make sense of it, these frames on existence. And each one has a different quality, a different set of constraints and affordances, powers and trade-offs, I feel. So category theories as a mathematical system and as a kind of meta-mathematics even, this would be like a way of when we're moving into territories of things that are as thorny as what is value is love, like what is a self? What is like, how can you actually even think into such a question? So you need some sort of organizing framework. Enter category theory as a useful tool. It's like a way of being like, okay, by saying this, I meant this. And now if you like, you can diagram it out. You can say, yep, that's what I meant. And so that's another way of knowing and keeping track, and you could say even staying honest. In addition to the staying honest of having that ping back of are you authentically feeling things and are actually like that resonance within. That's one way of keeping you honest. But another is there a bookkeeping scheme of some kind, a kind of conceptual framework? But you could go further with something like category theory or like these views of mathematics. It moves into almost like the religious, where it's like the world. A lot of this goes back to the ancient Greeks. So like the ideas like Plato talking about there being a reality of this world of ideal forms, which is in some ways a mathematical world, which is in some ways truer than this one. Or similarly, like the Pythagoreans, like the world as both like mathematics and song, and that the world is properly understood. And in some of my work, I actually suggest this, and others like Richard Watson, like the world, and also the way you describe things, the world is like resonating and like singing itself into being, like melody being like all there is. And so there's another like statements of what the world is, and we're getting into kind of almost like things of religion and reverence. And later I think like we really Perry Marshall, I don't know, maybe even today if he'd be willing to speak to this. When I met you, like you taught me your three favorite words of noumenal, liminal, and thin space as like these stances on existence. And so I almost view it like an acid test of to be in touch with source. Those are like dimensions of like evaluating my, am I in touch with these things? And have I like flied off into space? Or is like the tool helping me to tune in more clearly? So so the abstract understanding, can it help us to tune in? So but I don't know, Perry, would you be willing to like briefly speak to like those ideas and what they mean to you?
Numinous is the sensation of encountering something much larger than yourself that stimulates awe and humility. My friend Megan Macedo likes to say, I just want to stand on a cliff and feel insignificant. Liminal is the sense of reaching across a boundary and touching the unfamiliar, but feeling as though the unfamiliar is home. And these are not dictionary definitions. This is just me riffing. And a thin space is a place where the distance between heaven and earth is closer than it normally is. And there are thick spaces too. I've got a good friend. He was in a casino and he texts with his wife and he texts me and he goes, dude, this casino is a thick place. And I think if I don't get out of here, it's going to mess me up. There's so much darkness in here. And so it can go both ways. And I had an experience about 12 years ago where some people at church said, we're going to go on a contemplative retreat to the thin places of Ireland. And I thought, that sounds really neat, but I don't have time for that. My wife goes, you need to go. And your friend John needs to go too. By the way, John's the guy I just told you this casino story about. And so we went. And it was led by two people from Belfast, and they had spent decades of their life working to heal the troubles between the factions in Ireland. And they're true Irish mystics. And so we drove to literally the westernmost point in Ireland, and we stood on a cliff, and she told us this story. She says, when I was 11, my parents wanted me to learn the Irish language, so they put me on a bus, and I came to live here in Dunquin because this is a Gaeltacht community. And I spent the summer living here and learning Irish. And every day I would come stand on this cliff and look out over the ocean near the Blasket Islands. And I just enjoyed communing with nature. And then I left and I came back when I was 17. And she said, I came and I stood here right where we were all standing. And she says, and I heard the land say to me, Jerry, where have you been? I missed you. And her eyes got this big. And she did not attempt to logically explain this. She just said, when you come here, you look at the land and the land looks right back at you. That's one version of a thin place. I remember going to the Notre Dame Cathedral in Montreal, and the instant I walked through the door, I wasn't thinking about this. I wasn't expecting this. I walked in the door and I felt a presence. And like immediately, I just thought, somebody cultivated the Holy Spirit here. And one of the things about thin places is when you go there and you connect and you have that liminal, numinous experience and ground yourself in it, it has a click your heels and go back to Kansas quality. I'm sorry, I don't know everybody. The gentleman that led the little meditation at the
Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew, I'm sorry. And he says you can put your hand on your chest and you can breathe and you can click into that space. It's like that. And I found after I came home, I could put myself back into that space at will, and it became a form of practicing mindfulness. So I go to Ireland and Greenland all the time, not just once every year or whatever. Adam, is that helpful?
I'd say more than, but maybe it's more than I know.
I have a way that I can frame it better to Shinzen if that's welcome, because I think I put it out as a little bit too concise, but also happy for you to continue in your direction, Adam.
I like to hear like that's the thing. I want both like the compressions and the expansions. So I want both things. Maybe just like just a few thoughts before would be, so just I linked in like a previous communication, this video from this person, a Dan Flagella, and questioning the nature of, is anything of value? And it's like, in a future that we wanted to live into, like what would we say was a future where we had worthy successors or where we were happy about it? And what you're describing, like those things, I might say would be some of the most precious things. And that if those are the things that like, if that was lost, that those are things which, if they were lost, we might say all is lost, humanity was lost. And so the ability to not just have it on like in a beautiful scene where I met you, but to actually bring it into your life. And the way like you're describing this and this kind of stance of prayer and the way Andrew is giving us practices, and potentially even with a way of relating to something like the beauty of mathematics as a kind of analytic prayer, depending on how you approach it. Can you get to this basically access point to source a kind of love? What are the different gateways? Anyway, so that's my expansion. And so Max, if you could encapsulate in the frame, Dove, like see your hands raised.
Let Max speak and then I can come in.
Yeah, sure. So I think this can tie together some of these threads. So I think the broad question that I'm trying to pose is, why do we care about math and category theory and things in specific. And there's different ways of thinking about these frameworks and these heavy, big ideas. So on one level, we can talk about it as a formalism. That means, if you're talking about dynamical systems, states, times, operators, and these are actual variables and you follow rules to manipulate them. That's not the only thing that you can mean by category theory. There's also a way in which it becomes a worldview and a language. That's the conceptual framework part, where I'm not as familiar with category theory, but for dynamical systems, you start to talk about see the world in terms of attractors, patterns of movement, oscillations, and feedback. So that's it as a worldview. That's separate from the formalism itself. And then there's another level where you're understanding it as a literal description of the world. There's some people like Max Tegmark who talk about how the universe is fundamentally mathematical, whatever that would mean. And I think looking at it at these three different levels of the formalism, the conceptual framework, which includes the worldview and the language, as well as how it relates to reality, can help us start to talk about how does it have to do with our experience? How does it relate to love and what we care about? Does that come across a little bit clearer, Shinzen?
Yes, that's nice. I've been taking copious notes on everyone. Wow, what a bunch of poets. Were we selected for an interest in poetry? Because so far, so good, as far as keeping the ball going back and forth across the net.
It's in terms of poetics, I think like having this like clear sense of there's these different levels at which we're approaching things and knowing where we are at one point. I think I'll sometimes poetically, like shamanistically let it slide. And it's like I'm using one level as like a prior and the other level an intuition, but also knowing at which level you're operating when you're there, that's also good. Anyways,
Yeah. So
Shikas is raised hand. Oh,
what about Shikas?
I see we have a raised hand from Shikas.
Listen, I don't know how
Shinzen, how are
Shikas.
you?
Hey,
Okay.
Shikas, dude,
I
how'd
got a
you
bunch of
get
questions
invited
for
to
you.
this party? Come on, I cannot fucking believe this guy is here. This guy is the smartest guy in China.
No, you're exaggerating.
Yeah,
Smartest guy in
that's
my
an
room.
exaggeration, but not that much. Wow, okay. That was a
Yeah, I
really
love to
pleasant
ask
surprise.
a bunch of questions to Shinzen about category theory because we now have this very powerful AI tool such as the Google's Notebook LM, and we can definitely do the research ourselves. And there's a limited amount of information that really a conversation can deliver. I'm very curious. I've been listening to lots of talks on category theory for probably dozens, even hundreds of hours. I use it kind of practice of dominant mind. I don't really understand what they're saying, but I sense that it's very important. I've watched biography of people like Alexander Grothendieck, which is often perceived by many mathematicians as one of the unsung heroes and the greatest mathematician of the 20th century, but most people don't really know about him. So I think accessing these very important contributors to category theory, I think that's one portal for me personally, even though I'm not really I don't really have the mathematical maturity to really appreciate, but I understand that it's very important. I've heard that Huawei, for instance, is in fact incorporating category theory into the 6G network research.
Who is?
Huawei, the company.
Huawei.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, so we were talking about like the idea of the platonic space. I've also watched Ramanujan's biography. It's very interesting that even though he was not really educated formally, but he was able to write down 3,000 equations in around 12 years of his short lifetime, right? He died at the age of 32. And even now, 100 years later after he died, I think physicists and mathematicians are still inspired by his notebooks, his lost notebooks, and people are using his equations conceived 100 years ago to study the black hole. So that's just fascinating. How can a person who is not formally educated be able to access, quote unquote, some kind of platonic space? And I read that James Clerk Maxwell, of course, one of the founder of our modern civilization, on his deathbed, he said that he didn't really understand how the Maxwell's equation came to him. For him, it emerged in his mind automatically. So it's emerging from that kind of platonic space, right? It's accessing in the liminal realm of maybe lucid dream or dream yoga, as we would say, or even sleep yoga. In a way, I'm asking Shinzen to consider maybe sharing your conversation with the AI, how the average person, the average educated layman, can learn more about category theory in a way that interests the person. First of all, I talk about that is maybe there's a platonic space to access, so that inspires this sense of the numinous that people talk about. And also through the biography of important people like Alexander Grothendieck, and popularized like Julian Chan, she made a bunch of TED Talks, I think, that were really accessible for the average person, how category theory might be relevant for the average person. Of course, I'm very interested in Shinzen because I study Shinzen.
Eugenia Chang.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Eugeniacheng. She's a UK Chinese person.
Yeah, I love to know a lot more about category theory, but I understand there's very limited information that we can really receive from a conversation. So I wonder, Shinzen, if you can consider sharing your interactions with the AI that you think might help the public to understand more. So it's a kind of curator. So there's this idea of a blog, a curator.
You can't stop him.
You basically pick.
There's no stopping Shikas. He's worse than me. This guy, you don't know how much I love this guy.
So I guess we should take this into the discussion, right?
I was wondering, yes, if everyone would be okay with this, we could just hold what Shikas is asking for a moment and if this sounds okay to everyone, Andrew could bring us back with a bit of a breather meditation. And I'm actually thinking, if this sounds okay, we were going to do breakout rooms, but I feel like this group right here is invested in this discussion now. It might actually be a distraction to break apart and come back. So if everyone sounds okay with this, we could just take a little break with Andrew, come back to ourselves, and then come right back into the discussion. Does that sound okay to everybody? Okay.
Just a quick comment. I'm really looking forward actually to Shinzen, you describing some of the ways in which you've engaged with the new AI to, for instance, make these engage and learn and expand your mind with them. Because I personally actually have been meaning to do this, and I'm actually I'm a terrible hypocrite because I'm a big advocate for these technologies for changing the world, but I almost never use them. I'm intimidated by them, even just to engage with them. But I think they actually can be wonderful teachers and friends if you engage with them. And so Shikas was suggesting, actually, I know you've been on a journey with respect to your own relationship with math and growth, and that the AI has become a good friend to you. And that I know that could potentially be helpful for me to overcome both some of my math phobia and my AI phobia.
We can do it at some time. We'll put a pin in it, but let me just say it's cinematic. If you use the right syntax, the semantics are, you get a library card to the Vulcan Science Academy for the galactic blueprints of the great whatever.
I love that analogy.
But we need to group.
Fantastic conversation, everybody. I wanted to connect what I'm going to do with the wonderful comments from Perry and Adam about contraction expansion. To me, arguably the combustion cycle of the whole psychospiritual path. And I thought what Perry said was really beautiful. This notion of the numinous, spot on. The little guidance I'll do in a second is perhaps an invitation, like the hand over heart, to discover, literally, that the numinous is all there ever is. It's right here, right now, deeply connected effectively to the matrix of love, reality itself. And so the invitation with this very simple practice is to look below any experience to which you would append the label numinous, to which you would append the label spiritual, and I guarantee 100% you will find a quality of openness. And so as Adam chimed into the chat box, curious mind, reverent mind, loving mind, beginner's mind, underneath all is quality of open mind. My favorite definition of meditation, habituation to openness. Openness is a synonym of emptiness in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, so it has deep connections there. And just like I was saying earlier, we connect to the numinous by stopping, ceasing, contracting away from it. So close your eyes. We can reconnect on the spot, literally with a one breath meditation as we did last time. So one inhalation, one exhalation, full presence. And then perhaps to complete a second meditation session for today, one more, one breath meditation, open to reconnect, remember in the Platonic sense that you are always already forever connected to the numinous. You simply have to stop contracting and open to it. So one more one breath meditation can tap you in. That's it. That's all it takes. Short sessions, repeated often, dripping, sanity, taking a little sip of space, reconnecting to the numinous on the spot. Thank you.
So if it's okay, thank you, Andrew, so much. That really helped me personally just come back into a slower rhythm. And I know before you guided us through that, so Shikas had a question for Shinzen, which I cannot encapsulate. So if Shikas, I'm wondering if you'd be willing, if you could, in one sort of sentence question, re-ask your question to Shinzen. And then I did see Marcus and Daryl had their hands up. So I'm wondering if that works to go back to them after that.
Thank you, Amelia. So basically my question is really an ask for Shinzen to perhaps share a selection of his AI interaction on category theory that perhaps is approachable for the average educated layman. How would you explain the intersection between contemplative spirituality and category theory to a very precocious 15-year-old, for instance? And I would love to know more about the Ramona syntax because I found that definitely fascinating.
Can you read it?
No,
Is it clear?
no.
Oh, no, I lost it. Anyway, I'm just gonna, hold it just a second. Jotia, can you see what I've got on my device?
Yes, I can see.
This is-
It says
you
not
may
the
be-
AI, so like
yeah,
nano,
yeah.
nanometer AI, DeepSeek.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I live
I
in a
think you're
city
probably
where,
familiar with this, right?
oh, of course, yeah, DeepSeek.
Yeah.
In fact, is the headquarters is located in Hangzhou, so that's where I live.
Where this guy
yeah.
lives.
I walk by the headquarters often, like on casual walks. Yeah.
I'm coming, right now the plan is to come back to China next year. But I'm going to come back with dynamite and you and I can talk about this. But I'm doing it in everything I do in Chinese and English both, if at all possible. And yes, I've got all sorts of things to show off about how sci-fi you can get. And we can put a pin in that. I would like to show and tell some of those conversations and then show you how they put it into Chinese for me. And then we can start helping both sides of the Pacific. You understand?
Other interject quickly before Marcus and Darius would comment, but just these conversations, just I'm personally grateful for Andrew's meditations because I personally struggle a lot in knowing how to address them and to stay grounded as I do. For instance, like you bring up like DeepSeek, and I'm instantly thinking both in terms of that's so cool, and look at this democratized intelligence that you're engaging with it and as your empowering friend. And then I start thinking about AI arms races between the US and China and the increasingly scary AI discourse. And then I think category theory, we're talking about this in terms of its beauty and the love of it. But then I have this other frame of it where this is part of like how we have conversations to convince people that anything is of value.
Dude,
Anyway,
believe me, we will get
that's
to
not.
this.
Anyway, so
We will get to this.
I am glad we have this balance because I personally, as these things are brought up, like I'm having such a complicated mix of emotions. And so it's good that we're having like I personally need the meditations as we do this just to think of them myself. Anyway.
I'll decide to make that the protocol, that there's a mindfulness bell that we have to submit to. That works very well when you're having disagreements. So it should work even better for the generic setting. Just saying, in my communities, we've done that and it's worked very well.
Okay. Apologize for showing up late. I will definitely rewatch this because I was looking forward to getting a deep dive into category theory. I'm fairly introductory to it, but I have, I guess, two micro questions. One is I'm coming from a process relational ontology, and I'm curious, like the use of that word relation. I'm curious if that actually maps onto the relations we're talking about in category theory, or if the kind of relations of this graph in category theory are more just like associations. In the sense of a relation to me is like a dependent arising in like Buddhist framing, right? They're fully like connected in our beingness and they emerge together, whereas an association can just be a graph thing. And then second micro question, if anyone feels called to answer this, is I'm still unclear if at the bottom of it, it still has to be like a kind of quantitative thing. Like I know it can be a relation of relations and all this stuff, but I'm still unsure if it can describe processes this codependent arising or if it has to be a kind of quantity with some kind of unit, if that makes sense.
Is that a question to me or?
Yeah, anyone in category theory?
Yeah. I have something to say, but I like it when the whole room is participating. For me, the key term is actually applied category theory. So, of course, broadly in math, if you say category theory, it might imply there's two sides to it, one more abstract and the other in some way interacting with science, and through science, everything, but perhaps also it not having to factor through science, but as something that is part of math, but that each type of human being in the fucking world can find many things of value that empower their lived life, embodied life. That's how we're going to define
Hi there.
the
I'm Carson,
applied
the
side.
agent. You can follow my live transcript of this meeting here.
I
Otter.ai
apologize.
web link.
No
My
problem.
Yep.
screen
You can
reader
talk to me too.
is
Just say, hey,
speaking
Otter, to
out to
begin
me.
asking a question or giving me a task.
I had a telephone call
can you do?
come.
Leonardo's note taker. Otter.ai.
This is the way I
Everyone
actually
903.
read. So
And we all meditate
Feelings,
now until you
Leonardo
get
Chris.
control of
query
this
seems
thing.
unclear.
oh, very
Let's all
good.
meditate.
Clarify what
Transcript here.
You can
Otter.ai
mute
web link.
Wade for
We'll
him.
also be able to
Yes,
see screenshots of
I
the
am.
moments.
You got it.